Hi viewers, in this video we will delve into the movie What War Said. We will discuss the movie story, summarize the plot and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we will cover the movie production details and box office performance. Finally, we will share the review of the movie and personal reactions. Let's begin with the movie story. What War Said plays as if someone watched a similar 28 days later and thought that was a good movie. But it would be better if it cost $200 million. There were armies of zombies and the hero were perfect and played by Brad Pitt, which is another way of saying that if you need proof that sometimes more can be less, here you go. Directed by Marc Forster and written by everyone in Hollywood, if rumors are to believed, Thor 3 got credit this adaptation of Mass Brock's oral history of a zombie apocalypse. Hold on, I'm sorry, but before we take this movie apart, let's take a closer look at the last phrase. Oral history of a zombie apocalypse. Those 6 words tell you everything this film gave up by going in a conventional direction. I have never read book and don't have any immediate plan to, but the nation of telling this tale in a roundabout way. But having survivor of the conflagration sit there and talk to an unseen camera person, perhaps against a plain black background, with or without cutaways to still photographs or news video is electrified to consider. Such an approach might have yelled feed the first fresh contribution to the zombie picture since Wreck. The latter viewed an undead attack through the eye of a home video camera and treated the results as found footage, a great post-Blair Witch establishment, considering how much of horror's effectiveness lies in what you don't see. A faithful transcription of Brock's source might have taken fight film minimalism even further. What better way to amplify the hideousness of the dead attacking the living than by fixing a camera's unblinking eye on the survivors as they talk about the homes and people and limbs they lost in the struggle. A friend who has heard the audiobook version of What War Said said it reminded her of old-time radio drama, Theater of the Mind. She said, What War Said in contrast is just blood eye and ear candy. I realize it problematic to review a film on the basis of what I might have been. But when that same film substitutes a vision that's vastly less intricate and original than the one offered by its source, it's a fair tactic, and what's on screen here is just another zombie picture, gigantic but otherwise unremarkable. It's not that scary until you get to the end. Ironically, what makes the end work in its embrace of old-fashioned zombie film values, intimacy, silence, suggestion, and the strategic deployment of boredom to lull viewer into complexity and set them for the next big scare. What War Said is mostly David Lean on coffin phenomena of computer-generated zombies storming out like up walls and over barricades and taking down computer-generated coppers, while Foster close-up camera swings all over the place to generate unearned excitement. The final set piece watches 3 people sneak into a lab that's overrun by a few dozen sleepy and distracted flash snakers. It's slow, it's quiet, it's scary, it works. Sometimes when you reinvented the wheel, the result doesn't catch you every fall. Brad Pitt plays Gerry Lane, a former United Nations field agent who retired to spend time with his wife Karen and their charming daughter. He is a very other character played by Robert Redford in the 1970 and 80 novel Brave, Calm in a Crisis, endlessly resourceful, kind to his spouse and children, respectful of authority but no selfish so, independent-minded but not arrogant or snooze. Foster and his collaborator deserve credit for plugging us into the thick of things. The Lanes learn the society is collapsing when a seemingly ordinary urban traffic jam is jolted into serenity by an explosion, a stampede of terrified civilians and their vehicles, and a furious attack by people who have been infected by a virus that turns them into vengeance goals. The film's details are fuzzy, but I think they actually are goals here. Not just rabid and homicidal mortals, as in the day's picture. The rest of the pictures is globe-rotting medical mystery that just happened to feature zombies, with Lane and various helpers, some military and other scientific, trying to figure out what sparked the disease and counter it before the undead overrun everything. Its cardigan are the Amromeda strain, but with zombies and without much punches. Although Mireille's intense talents are wasted, she anchors a police procedure on television. But this Hollywood movie is contrast to cast her as a standard issue truthful wife. There are some dandy cameos and sporting turns. I like Dad Mort's one scene as a twisty, traumatized CIA agent who knows something about the origin of the disease, and James Wigdale as a US Special Forces captain who is gung-ho Kertesz is no match of the zombie hordes, and Daniella Kertesz as Segan, an Israeli soldier whose insatiable spirit helps the hero save the day even after she has suffered unimaginable trauma. But aside from Segan, none of the characters rise above the level of poorly functional placeholder types, and there are too many scenes that replica zombie film tropes, minus the passionate mention that other films has brought to the task. When a sporting character is infected and instantly turns, I was reminded of the masterful sequence in 28 Days Later in which Brendan Gleeson's jovial dad catch a drop of contaminated blood in his eyes and battle the virus while his daughter looks on. The poor bastard goes through a whole existential crisis in less than a minute. The sheer terror of losing one's soul has rarely been communicated so economically. Nothing in what was said comes anywhere near the scene's power. Forster deserves credit, I guess, for finding a way to make a PG-13 zombie movie without totally softening it. Herodotus violent occurs off camera or below the frame line but doesn't lack of impact. There are some shockingly good moments near the end, particularly when Gerry gets too close to a walker with snake rat teeth, but elsewhere you may feel as thought a gendered sense has been betrayed. Forster has made a zombie movie for people who don't like zombie movies. That's not the sort of the accomplishment one should brag about. Tales from the box office. World War Z overcame disaster to become the biggest zombie movie ever. Welcome to Tales from the Box Office, our common that examine box office miracle. One reason that the Hollywood movie had horror remained such as constant in Hollywood as they can be made on the cheap and that being by case bring the potential for high rewards. Just look at the Blair Witch Project or Phenomenal Activity, which were made of pennies and grossed hundreds of millions, but horror can also be a fertile ground of genuinely great storytelling. Well, beyond cheap thrills, that's what draw one of the world's biggest movie stars, Brad Pitt, to the genre when he turned World War Z into a passion project as both star and producer. The only problem, Pitt brought some pretty expensive taste along with him. Can we take this genre movie and use it as a Trojan horse for such a political problem, and what would the effect on the world be if everything we knew was upside down and pulled out from under us? Pitt said to the Hollywood Reporter in January of 2012, long before World War Z, the disastrously expensive adaptation of Max Brooks' beloved zombie novel of the same name hit theaters after one of the most infamously tenacious production in modern Hollywood history. Despite the eye-melting blockbuster budget, countless issues, breakdowns with the crew, and even a weapon state, the film defied the odds to become the biggest zombie movie in the history of zombie movies and one of the biggest horror movies ever. In honor of the movie's 10th anniversary, we are looking back at World War Z, how it came to be, what went wrong once cameras start rolling, how the budget plummeted to nearly $200 million in a historical cheap genre, what happened when the movie finally hit theater after multiple delays, and what lesson we can learn from it a decade later. Let's dig in, shall we? One thing that should be said up top in there is a most way one could cover the scope of a disaster that went on behind the scenes during the production of World War Z in a single edition of the column. It's a sort of thing that deserves a tell-all book at some point. That said, we are going to try and paint a picture of how everything seemed to be working against this movie's success en route to its surprising level of success. The movie's journey really starts with the book, which generated great interest from various studios even before its publication. Ultimately, Brad Pitt and his company Plan B landed the rights in 2006, with Paramount becoming the big studio partner. Pitt handpicked Marc Forster for the gig. The director had never worked on an effects-heavy blockbuster such as this, though he did have the all-trouble quantum of slash under his belt. It proved to be an issue, more on that in a bit. First, they needed to set about adapting Pox's novel, which is essentially a bunch of intimate, first-hand encounter of the zombie apocalypse. The movie that ultimately hit theater in a big globe action-adventure flick that hardly resembled the novel in any way, shape, or form. That ended up being the case because a small army of writers wrote and rewrote the script many times all the way through the lengthy production process. It all began with Mitchell's strategy of Babylon 5 fame. The nightmare process of looking down the script. Stangetti had the unbelievable task of adapting the much acclaimed novel for the big screen, having to please Pitt, Paramount, and the money man along the way. Brooks, for his part, didn't have many real say in the process. Basically, I have zero control. I am actually okay with that. Seriously, I got all the control and creativity I needed writing the book. Don't want to see the debit by dealing with the studio. I'd much rather step back and see the movie as a fan, Brock said to Eat My Brains in 2006. While Stangetti draft would eventually received acclaim after leaking online, the studio was not a fan of this take on the materials. They slammed the door so hard in my face, it came off the hinges. The writer said of the reaction to his final draft in a lengthy piece from Vanity Fair publisher in 2013 ahead of the movie's release, detailing its nightmare production. Pitt and Stangetti's account, they just had different ideas when it came to what kind of movie they were trying to make. David Fincher is glad his World War Z sequel never got made. It was like the last of it, which has a lot more real estate to explore the same stuff. In a new interview with GQ magazine UK, ahead of the release of his latest directorial effort, The Killer, David Fincher expressed a bit of release over at World War Z sequel never getting off the ground. Why? He revealed the sequel storyline was a bit too similar to HBO widely popular apocalyptic video game adaptation. Well, it was a little like The Last of Us, Fincher said when the World War Z sequel has mentioned. I am glad that we didn't do what we were doing because The Last of Us has a lot more real estate to explore the same stuff. In our title sequence, we were going to use the little parasite. They use it in their little sequence and in that wonderful opening with the Dick Cavett David Forster-like show. The original World War Z movie was inspired by Max Brooks' 2006 book of the same name and starred Brad Pitt as a former UN employee who traveled the globe to find a cure to stop a massive zombie pandemic. Marc Forster directed the action film, which Paramount Picture released in summer 2013 to a decent $540 million in the worldwide box office. The film carried a lofty budget upward of $190 million and had a notorious reshoot process in which the ending was overhauled, but Paramount still thought a sequel might be worth it by pairing Pitt with his Fight Club and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Dr. Fincher. The World War Z sequel was supposed to start filming in June 2019, but reports surfaced in February of that year that the project was dead due to budget-related issue. Fincher was apparently willing to direct the sequel for less than the $190 million price tag of the first movie, but the money required to pull off his vision for the film was still too high for Paramount. Given Fincher teased that his next World War Z sequel was similar to The Last of Us, the staff crew assumed the storyline would have teamed up Brad Pitt's character with a younger co-star as the two form a makeshift father-daughter relationship amid another terrifying zombie outbreak. Elsewhere in his GQ interviews, Fincher addresses concerns of AI disrupting Hollywood. He called AI a really powerful tool but expresses doubt that it can ever replicate art created by humans. I have not heard an AI Beatles song that compared to Eleanor Rigby, Fincher said, so until somebody plays an AI song that knocks me out, maybe that's just where we are at now, and I may be eating my words in a year, but I think ultimately the thing that we respond into our poetry and writing and songs writing and photography is the personal bent, the thing that's making. Fincher said that the AI technology was useful as a protection tool during the making of his Michael Vesper starring assassin thriller The Killer. Look, we had a few lines of dialogue that we had looped, but we could not get right with Mitchell, so he set it into an iPhone in an environment that was not conducive to being used as a voiceover. And we could take it and process it through the hour of voiceover that we had, and spit back out, and it was clean, and it was the music of his wife, Fincher explained, and that's incredibly handy to have. Netflix is opening The Killer in selected theater on October 27. What Was That movie review? What Was That is Brad Pitt's highest grossing film. Paramount Picture announced today that The What Was That has now earned $500 million at the worldwide box office, making it star Brad Pitt's most successful film ever. 2004 Troy was his previous best with $497 million. According to Deadline, What Was That has set several records for Pitt, a personal best with a 66 million opening and a total 197 millions in the States. Both of these exceeds Pitt's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which had a 50 million opening weekend and a total domestic gross of $186 million. What Was That currently has 305 million international box office sales. Considering the film's major production struggle, including a complete rewrite and reshoot of the third act, Pitt director Marc Forster and the studio are no doubt believed to see their hard work actually paid off. Brad Pitt, Paramount get the last laugh at What Was That, cracks $500 million World War II become his highest grossing film. Paramount Picture reports the What Was That has passed the $500 million worldwide gross mark, surpassing Troy's $497 million to become Brad Pitt's highest grossing film ever. Now you could argue that What Was That received the benefit of the higher ticket price, particularly because of its 3D numbers, but considering how badly mangled this film was in the weeks before it bought, hitting the $500 million value seems something to brag about even for a movie that cost in the $220 million range. According to Paramount, which co-financed with Skydance and GK Films, WW said has set several records for Pitt, whose Plan B produced. It set a personal best with a $66 million opening on June 21 and a total $197 million in the US, both of which exceed Mr. and Mrs. Smith's total domestic gross of $186 million and $50 million opening weekend. The film has earned $305 million at the international box office to date. This pales in comparison to the numbers put up by Johnny Depp and his Alice in Wonderland and Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. But Pitt has done a lot of cool movies that were never meant to be blockbuster, and this was his most mainstreaming film since Troy and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He seems happy with hitting a soaring double with a Moneyball that playing the tentpole game. Passing the $500 million mark speaks the question of whether Pitt returns for an encore. The movie was such a giant headache to make that it's a big question mark, partly because they more or less resolved the crisis with the rewritten and reshot third act for dropping a giant battle scene in Russia that nobody liked. My Pit is that Pitt directed Marc Forster and the studio walk away breathtaking, a sign of relief that things turned out as well as they did, and that our proved a lot of nasty wrong, and that is something worth chasing a fix on a movie that comes in flawed. Another day, another zombie flick, albeit a bigger budget on with a list based on. In this adaptation of Max Brock's cult novel, Brad Pitt plays an ex-UN investigator sent to seek out the source of an undead plague that has ravaged the earth, causing the warm-blooded to sail to sea or flee to the remote wilds of Nova Scotia. Unlike George Ramos' lumbering copies, these movies boast the footness of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead reboot and the shocking impressions of Danny Boyle 28 days later. There's some cross-infection too from Steven Sauber's contribution with which shares it fears of accelerated global transmission. The opening is braver as the turning rather than Walking Dead take unexpectedly to the streets, swarming like ants across a landscape littered with fragments of the source novel's socio-political star. Israel protects itself with a massive wall. North Korea starts pulling out teeth. Yet somewhere the film loses its nerve and its pride, settling for desperate grand skill set pieces. Every time director Marc Forster shouted action, presumably a producer shouted more action. An episodic globe-trotting plot pad before finding its way to a medical center in Wales, ready for an old-fashioned third act replete with men in white coat and glowering British TV stalwarts. Amid all the tapes of spiraling budget and extensive reshoot, it's hard not to conclude that whatever heart the project may once have had been bypassed, leaving a raggedy assortment of body parts expensively assembled but lacking a sustaining pulse. World War Z reviews. Some of my favorite gaming moments stem of co-op session with friends and the chaos that can ensure with all your careful brain start to go awry. World War Z is a competent but basic shooter that seems designed to foster the sort of memorable moments, and that is surely its greatest strength. It's a good venue of a group of 4 friends to get together, drop in massive zombie hordes, maybe save a few survivors here and there and laugh about it when the result roll. There's nothing rationally or even that remarkable about World War Z, but the formula it follows is proven to be fun. I don't know how else to put it. It's bad, it's a mess, it's barely functional as a piece of entertainment and not at all as a movie. I don't even know where to start. I could write 1,000 words on how it is not World War Z and 1,000 words on its narrative failures and yet another 1,000 words on the shitty filmmaking. But in the interest of word count and not suffering a rage stroke as I write this, let's run down the short version. First, it is not World War Z. If you have read the book and watched the movie, you will recognize a few beats in the background, but Brad Pitt basically paid 7 figures for a title because that's all that survives in fact. Second, it's only an effect story in the sense that there are characters who have names that interact as events occur. That's where the resemblance to proper storytelling ends. The characters are barely even that, at best they are ciphers, at worst they are interactive. Cardboard cautious, shaped like people, Pitt plays Gerry, a former UN inspector who takes off on a round there the world according to try and find out where the zombie outbreak started, leaving his family behind in the military care, and that's all there is. There is no arc, no development, and Gerry exists merely to run around and kill zombies. His wife, if she had a name, he didn't regret, exists merely to look scared. His kids are there only to be imperiled and whine about being imperiled. They are intolerable and should have been eaten by zombies. The various people shoot at them that Gerry encounters along the way are window dressing, or else they open their talking holes and prostrate. Ex-party message came out. I cannot state enough how nobody in this movie is an actual person, because no one in this movie is an actual person. And third, on a basic technical level, This is not competent filmmaking. I am kind of baffled by the number of reviews letting director Marc Forster of the book and the regular movie gears who are shrugging it off as, hey, it's okay in the end. I think it's because pacing is one of the few problems World War Z doesn't have. Its clock is at just under 2 hours and moves relatively fast the whole time. But that doesn't change the fact that the action is incoherent, the editing is piss poor, there's no one to care about, the lack of real character, and the zombie hordes are completely not fitting. Also, the acting is not bad, but that's only because no one actually has to act so much as showed up and recite line. In case you think I am coming down hard on a movie I was prepared to hate, here is what is wrong with this movie. It's a horror movie that is not scary. It's a procedural that is not interesting. It's a drama that is not compelling. Yet it moves quickly and there's a ton of action, but those zombies hordes, there's all CGI. Even its close-up, they are CG zombies with that unmistakable mannered look and barely draws faces. They are instantly rendered unscary because they are patently fake. And that fast-paced work against the dramatic element as we blew past otherwise recurring scenarios so quickly they barely have time to register. Dito for would be interesting character. The plane crash sequel that you see in the trailer is mostly effective and also the most coherent action set piece in the film, which is not saying much, but you take what you can get. It's sufficiently tense and frightening until it ends in a frustrating way that even the most dedicated Pitt fan is going to have a hard time swallowing. And that the movie concludes in a similar fashion with a wide open baggy, please give us a sequel open-ended non-resolution. It's an unsatisfying ending for an unsatisfying movie. But it's not going to matter. World War Z cost too much to make and market to be able to achieve real blockbuster status, and it will break even tough Paramount and undoubtedly write it off as a loss anyway. Even though domestic projections are not good and China, the second biggest market in the world, will not be releasing it. Brad Pitt's name is still enough to get butts in seats and man, Pitt is hustling. He is making surprise appearances at advanced screenings, bringing his family on the press tour, cranking up the pit. He is throwing all the spaghetti at the wall. What Bart said will not be home run by any means, but he is going to avoid getting egg on his face, and these lowered expectation that kind of counts as a win. World War Z transformed from an engaging glimpse at post-apocalyptic human enduring into a brainless shell that is an absent-minded at its undead subject matter. Based on the apocalyptic horror novel by author Max Brooks, directed Marc Forster, World War Z trades the book's segmented interview structure for a linear, jet-setting thriller story, one that takes protagonist Gerry Lane from one zombie-infested local to another. Prior to the outbreak, Lane, a retired UN investigator, is living a quiet life as a stay-at-home dad, happily tending to crops and making breakfast for his wife Karen and two daughters. That is until a new strain of rabies devastates Philadelphia as waves of ordinary people turn to vicious killing machines seconds after infection. When major cities fall and the US military begins to lose control of the situation, UN officials offer to extract Lane and provide his family safe harbor. The offer comes with a price. The UN will house Lane family if it start a high-level scientist on a mission through a zombie-infested local to track down the source of the virus in the hopes of finding a cure. Despite the eye-popping image of zombies clambering over one another in the World War Z trailer, Marc Forster is best known for intimate character stories, stranger than fiction, dark blockbuster CGI spectacle. As a result, while there's plenty of action in the film, moviegoers hoping for enormous sense of zombie killing would be overwhelmed by the overall World War Z experience. The enormous zombie crowd shows are attention-grabbing, though most of them were already outed in the pre-release marketing. But Forster's primary focus is Lane's search for a solution to the outbreak. The result is an awkward disconnect. The first half of the film is exposition heavy setup, not the balloon or zombie action depicted in the advertising, and the latter half is the complete opposite, dropping story in favor of lengthy zombie encounters. Lane's post-apocalyptic journey ultimately provides interesting ideas and tense zombie moments, but as a full movie experience is a fractured and disconnected set of sequences held together by a paper-thin MacGuffin chase. Despite the rich novel source material, the story is extremely familiar with a number of stale side plots paired with teas that go nowhere. The film spends a lot of time educating viewers on the aspect that makes the World War Z outbreak different from previously seen zombie tales, but some of the more interesting concepts are never explored on screen. It's common knowledge that the movie underwent significant 11th hour reshoot and the division are noticeable, even though the final product is accelerating since the movie benefits from a fresh set of action sequences in the third act. Any new material comes at the expense of established storylines that are all but abandoned. It's a disjoint narrative experience that presents absorbing information upfront and then slides into thoughtless blockbuster fare with only a tacked on explanation to bring everything full circle in a surprisingly modest climax. Fortunately, performances in World War Z are strong even if certain moments border on melodrama. Unsurprisingly, Pitt is a solid lead with a likable balance between nonsense, survival skills, and sympathetic reaction to the horror surrounding him. It's hardly one of Pitt's most captivating roles, but the star helps around a number of key scenes that, with a less known section in the role, could have easily been eye-rolling instead of engrossing. Enos the killing is actually effective as Lane's wife Karen successfully selling his season of agreeing to the mission. The movie doesn't bother to develop her character beyond the relationship with Lane, but Enos makes the most of her scenes and even gets to fluent some expressive, albeit brief, zombie fighting capability. While Enos is downgraded midway through the movie, Daniella Kertesz adds a high adept heroine for the latter half as an Israeli soldier. Second that accompanies Lane is investigation, while Segan's actions don't always make complete sense given her knowledge of the situation, even help drive several of the movie's best scenes of tension and provide Kertesz with several memorable moments to justify her screen time. Other supporting players including Fana Mokana, James Bigdale, Peter Capaldi, Professor Favano, Lottie Brocken, and even Matthew Fox get opportunities to shine, but are little more than window dressing to provide Pitt with receptive listener for exposition. Of course, the real star of the film are the zombies, and for the most part, they deliver a number of cool variations to the genre staples. As mentioned, the best zombie transformer shots are spoiled in the film trailers, but the efficiency and brutality of the World War Z zombies, who can even spring their bodies into the air to tackle fleeing victims, definitely create plenty of exciting set pieces. Additionally, in service of helping Lane learn more about the outbreak, the film gives the character room to experience uncover the various intricacies of the zombie spread. Any of the subsequent revelations are not particularly profound, but there is a limited sense of discovery that helps keep things moving even when the story falters. That said, zombie horror scenes especially are often too frantic or CGI heavy to fully appreciate the scale and scope of the larger sequence, especially in 3D. World War Z is playing in both 3D as well as 2D, and while certain scenes are definitely more impressive and intense with the added 3D effect, viewing the movie in 2D should help mitigate the frontside action shoots of moviegoers who are put off by shaky cam-style cinematography. Viewers who don't mind springing off a 3D ticket will gain some benefit from the upgrade, but curious audience members who expect a lot of noticeable third dimension effect when the payoff of a premium screening will likely be underwhelmed by the film's subtle use of the format. What is a strange mix of intriguing character drama and story ideas that ultimately caves under the pressure of delivering a summer blockbuster movie experience with zombies. For many film fans, the journey from point A to B to C will be enough, but What does little to renovate or expand upon similar zombie genre offering, relying heavily on the notation that our zombies makes of a better zombie movie. Unfortunately, certain viewers will be overwhelmed by that approach, since as the story progresses, What transforms from an engaging glimpse as post-apocalyptic human entrance into a brainless shell that is absent-minded as undead subject matter, running thoughtlessly toward one over-the-top story bite to the next, while its data to humanity rapidly fade away. If you're still on the fence about What said, you can check out the trailer on YouTube. How What said originally ended and why it was changed. The What said ending went through some major changes before the film was released, with a dramatically different conclusion originally planned for the zombie blockbuster. Starring Brad Pitt and released in 2013 amid the zombie craze in Hollywood, What seems destined for success until reports of major reshoots surfaced. Nevertheless, when audience and critics alike saw What most were somewhat surprised to see that the end result was a decent, big-budget zombie movie that proved to be a solid box office hit. Indeed, despite director Marc Forster and the crew scrapping the original What ending, the movie remained an exciting and entertainment both in Brad Pitt filmography and in the zombie horror subgenre. However, the movie was also vastly different from the book it was based on from author Max Brooks, and it seems as tough the movie had a difficult time adapting the source material to the big screen. The result was a handful of ideas of how to end the movie that would have been much different from what audience saw. How What original ending was different. In the What theatrical cut ending, Gerry Lane, played by Brad Pitt, finds himself in a World Health Organization building with a few fellow survivors, but the information he seeks is at the center of the building, which has been overrun by the infected. Lane infects himself with a pathogen that can hide him from those who are infected, and he is able to walk past the ramping zombies unarmed, a montage that closes. The film shows humanity fighting back against the horde, writing a hopeful ending of the survivors and potentially setting up World War Z2. However, the original World War Z ending begins with Lane and Sigan flying to Moscow, where they are immediately drafted into the army being built to fight the zombies instead of going to the WHO building. The original ending featured a time jump showing a battle plan still fighting in Russia during the winter. It's during the time he realized the zombies move slower in the cold, giving the humans an advantage in these conditions. World War Z's final scene had them arriving in America and storming the country to find his family. He's been out of communication with his family his entire time, but he is finally able to speak to his wife, who has secretly had to strike up a relationship with Matthew Fox, paratrooper, a character that is only briefly seen in the theatrical cut. To keep her and the kids safe, later on, Lane, Sigan, and a character named Simon begin traveling through Russia to go to the United States and save Lane's family. What was that original final scene had them arriving in America and storming the country to find Lane's family. What was that original ending was too bleak. This bleaker ending of What Was Said came as a result of the script not being entirely finished when production began on the film. After filming was completed with Marc Forster assembled the first cut of the film, the Paramount executives and Pitt did not like the original World War Z's ending. Those who have seen the early cut of the World War Z describe the ending as abrupt and incoherent, which lines up with the description of the footage that has since been revealed. In order to fix the ending, Paramount hired Damon Lindelof to rewrite World War Z's script, ordered 7 weeks of reshoots and spent tens of millions of dollars shooting over 40 minutes of the 2-hour blockbuster. Even though all of these changes saw World War Z's budget balloons to over $200 million, still managed to do fairly well at the box office, earning $540 million worldwide. The end results gave Paramount a film that was successful enough to generate sequel conversation, with David Fincher signing on for a World War II before exiting the project. Whether World War has become a franchise remains to be seen, but it is clear that the original ending was dramatically different from what the audience saw. The World War ending is why a sequel should happen. The World War Z ending and script change result is a myriad of production problem, and the source material deserves a better adaptation, which can still happen in a sequel. In fact, while Paramount sequel plans have since been scrapped, David Fincher's rumor for World War II plot eventually revealed that the vaccine Greenland used in the ending only works for 36 hours, and that globally political tension continued to worsen as the zombie hordes grows and took over more territories. By diving deeper into virology and world politics, World War Z2 could rectify the issue with the first movie, give the story a more thought out and tone appropriate climax, and finally do justice to the 2006 apocalyptic horror novel of the same name that pushed the zombie genre beyond its limits. The World War Z book ending is also different. 2013 World War Z is a very different story from the 2006 novel by Max Brooke that it's based on. 2006 World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war, while the movie follows Pitt Gerry Lane on a globe-trotting adventure to save the world from the zombie outbreak. Max Brooks' novel is a much more expansive story with no one protagonist. Instead, it takes a look at the origins, the war, and the aftermath of the zombie outbreak through a variety of characters across the world. It shows the different ways that world react and deals with the issue, while also considering the global ramification. Likewise, the ending of World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war, differs greatly from the movie as well. With no heroic lead like Gerry Lane in the book, there is no need for a rescue mission or a father reuniting with his family. There is also no miracle cure as there is in the movie. Instead, the book takes a look at the gradually victory humanity has over the zombie, which is a mix of brutality, cruelty, and bravery. Some countries elect to choose some of this season as bait to give the more populated areas time to spare for battle. The World War Z book ends on a hopeful note that humanity was able to overcome extinction and will return to its former glory eventually. Over time, countries attempt to simply wait out the zombies, aware that they decompose and become barely a threat over time. However, the United States decided to go for a more aggressive route, aiming to retain its military for zombie warfare and wipe out the entire population of the undead. Eventually, more countries follow the same method. Over several years, the book tracks small victories leading to the majority of the world being liberated. The book then looks at the global impact of the war against the zombies. The war dynamic has changed dramatically, and rush vessel, the human spice, is also weakened, with life expectancy dropping considerably. With a lack of natural resources, there is also a regression in strategy development, relying on older technology and tools. However, the World War Z books end on a hopeful note that humanity was able to overcome extinction and will return to its former glory eventually. Which World War Z ending is the best? There are varied opinions on the best World War Z ending, and some of them are tied to why the 2013 movie was so divisive when it released. Many fans of the original novel by Max Brooks plan director Marc Forster films because it deviated so much from the source material. For them, the ending of World War Z and oral history of the zombie war will be the best, with neither of the ending of 2013 World War Z coming close. However, comparing the ending of the Max Brooks novel to the theoretical and original ending of the World War Z movie is not really an accurate context. While both are showing an outbreak of the infected and share a name, the stories of the World War Z book and film are incredibly different. As such, the ending of each are intended as finales for separate and distinct narrative. The ending of the World War Z book would not work for the movie because it's too broad in scope. Likewise, ending World War Z and our history of the zombie war with a chapter about UN worker Gerry Lane finding his family could not fit, especially since Brad Pitt's character was created for the 2013 movie and does not appear in the novel. The World War Z book and movie ending each have their own merits and drawbacks, but they also exist somewhat independently of one another. When it comes to the World War Z theoretical vs alternate ending, the original fella did have constraints. The bleaker approach that saw the real World War Z scratching on for years would have felt more in keeping with the Max Brooks novel, with the presumption being Gerry Lane's on-screen story ended before the uplifting final chapter of the World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war when humanity starts winning. Having Lane not find his family yet could also have made the emotional impact of the film hit harder. However, considering that World War Z was planned to be a blockbuster hit and appeal to as broad an audience as possible, it could be said that the World War Z theoretical ending fit the goals of Studio Paramount Picture the best. While it might not have been director Marc Forster's initial plan, the story became one of heroism and action movie spectacle. A happier climax with distinct resolution like the final World War Z ending was much more suited to this than the alternate version. That was the theory at least. Whether this made World War Z a better movie in subjective, especially in hindsight. However, the middling box office and critical response to the final cut of the 2013 film suggests that the original plan was dismissed too hastily. World War Z movie by Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt, Killing Them Softly, returned to the big screen with World War Z, a big budget zombie apocalyptic movie. The film focuses on Gerry Lane, a retired UN investigator who is forced back into action by the zombie pandemic. Gerry, his wife, and their two children are in downtown Philadelphia when they first encounter the outbreak. They are immediately forced into survivor mode. When a little bit of luck, they make it out of the city and end up in New Jersey, only to encounter more zombies. They take shelter with a Hispanic family in an apartment complex before making a mad dash to the roof to a waiting evacuation helicopter sent courtesy of Gary's former boss at the UN. They are taken to a floating Ramada that is the current command center for what remains of the US government and the UN. And Gerry is forced back into action to score a place for his wife and children on the ship. He is sent out with a SEAL team and the scientists to investigate a message about zombies that was sent from a base in South Korea. But after getting no real answer, he is sent along to Israel, who seems to have known about the zombies and prepared for them. After a brief investigation, all hell breaks loose and Jerusalem is quickly overrun by zombies, and Gerry and a lone injured Israeli soldier make it onto the last plane out of the airport. Gerry comes up with the theory that the zombies are not attending terminally ill people and has the plane routed to the nearest World Health Organization center near an airport, which is in Wales. An outbreak occurs on the plane before it can lead and it crashes into the Welsh countryside. Seriously injured, Gerry and the soldier Segan make their way to the WHO coordinate and after receiving treatment attempt to recover disease simplest from an infested wing of the facility in order to test Gary's theory. World War Z is an apocalyptic horror novel written by Max Brooks and published in 2006. The book is presented as an oral history of the global war against the undead, chronicling the events of the devastating zombie pandemic that nearly led to the collapse of human civilization. Through a series of interviews with survivors, Max Brooks weaves a gripping and immersive narrative offering a comprehensive interview of the zombie apocalypse from various perspectives and locations around the world. The novel begins with an introduction by an unarmed narrator, a member of the United Nations Post-War Commission. He explained the purpose of the book to gather accounts from people who survived the worldwide conflict with the zombies referred to as Zai. The first interview is with patient Zero, a Chinese doctor named Kong Jingsu. He recounts the initial outbreaks in China, where the virus manifested in the form of a rabies-like infection. The Chinese government attempted to suppress news of the outbreak, leading to disastrous consequences as the virus spread rapidly. The disease was initially dismissed as a hoax, allowing the pandemic to escalate unchecked. As the infection spreads beyond China's border, other countries faced their own battles with the undead. In South Africa, the government developed the radical plan, a ruthless strategy to sacrifice a portion of the population to ensure the survival of the human race. The plan involved setting up phased zombies while leaving some areas as kill zones to lure the undead away from the population centers. Throughout the book, Brooks interviews individuals from various backgrounds, include military personnel, civilization, government officials, and scientists. The stories range from tragic accounts of loss and survival to tales of resilience, ingenuity, and heroism. Among those interviewed are soldiers who fought in the Battle of Yonkers, a disastrous early attempts to combat the zombies using conventional military tactics. The novel explores how different countries and societies respond to the crisis. In Israel, an early warning system and a combination of military and civilization cooperation allowed them to build a secure wall allowed the country successfully fighting off the undead hordes. Conversely, in North Korea, the government isolation policies resulted in the entire population being turned into zombie. As the outbreak continued, the US government struggled to contain the pandemic. A quarantine of the entire country was attempted but failed. Eventually, the military was forced to retreat to Hawaii and regroup. Throughout the entire states, various survivalist groups, religions, cults, and militaries emerged, each with its own approach to the crisis. One of the most interesting interviews in the book is with a famous astronaut who was aboard the International Space Station when the pandemic broke out. The astronaut witnessed the chaos on Earth from orbit and later helped in the post-war recovery efforts. As the world began to recover from the worst of the outbreak, the post-war commission was established to investigate the war and develop strategies for the future. The book's narrator explained that the lesson learned from the war against the undead could be applied to prevent similar disaster from occurring in the future. World War Z is more than just a zombie horror story. It's a social commentary on human nature, government, bureaucracy, and the consequences of denial and misinformation during a crisis. Max Brooks uses the zombie apocalypse as a metaphor for real-world issues such as global pandemics, tourism, and geopolitical tension. The book highlights how different cultures and societies react to disaster, and it underscores the importance of cooperation, communications, and preparedness in facing catastrophic events. The novel's format of first-person accounts provide a sense of authenticity and realism to the story by presenting a diverse range of voices and experience. Brock's creates a multifaceted exploration of the global catastrophe. World War Z is a captivating and thought-provoking read that has resonated and readers worldwide, becoming a modern classic in the zombie genre. In conclusion, World War Z by Max Brooks is an engaging and imaginative apocalypse novel that presents a realistic and terrifying account of global zombie pandemic. Through a series of interviews with survivors, the book offers a multifaceted views of the crisis, exploring the human response to catastrophe, the failures of governance and leadership, and the capacity for courage and inequality in the face of extreme adversity. This thought-provoking and suspenseful tale has commented its place as a must-read in the zombie genre and a social commentary on the human condition. And the World War Z movie is based on this novel. I was not a huge fan of World War Z, but not because it seems in any way patched together, which many feared it would after the reshoot. In fact, I thought the climatic scenes in the research center were probably the strongest in the movie. My biggest problem was just how by the number it all seems this movie contained not a single surprise for me, but reading through movies report on the original ending, I can see not only why reshoots were called for, but there was a much bellier, more compelling film in there somewhere. The theatrical ending of World War Z sees Gerry, Brad Pitt, and Siegel, played by Daniella Kertesz, manage to find a core or shorts to the zombie outbreak and travel meet Gerry's family, where everything ends with hugs and kisses while we wait the inevitable sequel. Safe but exactly very surprising, right? But have a read of this which occurs after Gerry and Siegel board the domed plane from Jerusalem. The plane Gerry and Simon board is bound of Moscow. Upon safely landing, everyone on board is surrounded by the military. The elderly and the sick are executed, and the healthy people, including a very shaken Gerry, are immediately drafted into armed service. Thaw not before one particularly nasty Russian soldier takes Gerry's cell phone. The story then jumps forward an unknown amount of time, and we catch up with Gerry, who now has a full beard and has been a part of Russian zombie clearing squad at least long enough for it to have changed to winter. He looks almost dead inside, but the reality is that over that time he has become an experienced and ruthless zombie killer, and he is the leader of his own equally capable unit. Gerry's unit is tasked with clearing subway tunnels of zombie hordes. This is the first time we see the Lobo, a perfect zombie killing tool that's a shot of a shovel battle axe that would have been one of the few things from the book to make it into the movie. Gerry and his team use them to slice their way through every poor zombie that tracks them through the tunnel by following their sounds. It's all routine work for them, and when they are not in the tunnel killing, they are basically just preparing to go back in. During his downtime, we see a bit of bonding between Gerry and another English-speaking friend, Simon. The two play a guessing game of what celebrities would have survived the outbreak. We get a couple intense scenes of tunnel combat. At one point, Gerry has to kill one of his own after being bitten. And eventually they emerge above ground and are right in the middle of the Battle of Red Scar, pictured in the banner. He is likely not from the movies and was created just for marketing purpose. This is a much larger set piece that involves several different front lines constantly fighting the hordes. There's a kind of weird plot point of Gerry teams now getting reassigned to different front lines based on what their religion is. Gerry and Simon are atheists. The logic being that people would find harder alongside people of the same faith, but they are segregated, and Gerry tries to convince the general in charge that his allied tunnel sweeping crew should be allowed to teach those other people how to fight with lobos and makeshift shield and whatnot. There's arguing with this Russian general, but eventually Gerry convinces him to let him teach some of the other front lines how to fight, but this involves having to go back into the tunnels with Simon so that they can sneak past the zombies on the other side. It's there that Gerry notices the zombies are having a hard time dealing with the severe Russian winter by remembering just how fast they were in Jerusalem, and so it's occurred to him that the way to defeat the zombies is to let their bodies freeze. Gerry and Simmons are now on a mission to inform the Russian command to extinguish all fires and move their battle lines so that to keep as many of the zombies in the cold as possible. But then they run into a generator room where the nasty Russian soldier who took his wound upon arrival in the canteen, boozing it up with some very reluctant guards. One of those guards is Sigan. Gerry grabs a belt of grenades and tosses one into the room. Sigan and Simon duck behind a couch to survive the blast before making a break for it. Once again, Gerry meets up with the general and convinces him to use Russian coal to their advantage so that they done in the post-Homeland Wars. This works as he orders everyone to extinguish all of their fires. Eventually, this gives them the upper hand in the battle. Gerry takes his turn toward the offensive to retreat. He takes a couple of shots of vodka, then picks up the phone he received from the soldier and calls his wife Karen. Even beyond the entire Russian battle sequence, this is called to his wife that's the real game changer for the aborted tune of World War Z. Why the original World War Z ending had to change. When a movie goes into reshoots late into production, it's usually a sign that the film is in trouble. That trouble is double with a movie has to completely rewrite its final act and ending before it goes into those reshoots. Luckily, that was not the case with World War Z. While the film is not perfect, it's serviceable considering the film's production problem. In fact, one can make the case that reshoot and rewrites were the best thing for World War Z. In a column on movies.com, Director Marc Forster broke down why World War Z ending was not working and how they tried to fix the problem. If you are not aware, the last third of World War Z was completely different than what Forster and Brad Pitt conceived in the film's original screenplay. Basically, everything from one Brad Pitt's Gerry Lane and Israeli soldier Sigan crash land in Wales after the zombie epidemic crashed Jerusalem is new material they had to shoot before the film's release in June. Originally, the pair landed in Russia and were then forced to fight the rising numbers of zombies in giant battle sequence. Forster began explaining the World War Z change with the problem with that battle sequence is you get lost because obviously you cannot just stay with Gerry. You have so much more going on, so you lose the connection with him. What the ending should really be about is solving the riddle of how to combat with zombies, and then continues about World War Z, and to make it a more quiet and suspenseful is a much more interesting approach than to do it in a big battle way. That's how these discussion came about and why we ended up setting the ending in a World Healthy Organization lab. As in all of my movies, I am always about the character, about these quiet moments. So I was really happy when everyone came around and agreed and supported that vision. I am refreshing that Forster and Pitt went smaller and quieter than most summer blockbuster inevitable go bigger in the final act. It's refreshing the Forster and Pitt went smaller and quieter when most summer blockbuster inevitable go bigger in the final act. Movies like The Avengers, Transformers, Dark of the Moon, Man of Steel, and Best Film Rims has showcased the trend of culminating summer blockbuster with ever more destruction, more action, and bigger stakes. Forster continued explaining about what was said. I believe in this ending more than anything. What I also liked about it was very summer blockbuster is trying to the third act is to do a bigger set piece that bigger and louder than you have seen in the rest of the movie. He then said, I felt going against the grain and doing something more quiet and simple will be so much interesting and refreshing and something that we are not used to. I was excited coming from a concept standpoint that everybody was willing to go there and not be like everybody else and do this big battle set piece, which was huge and loud as long that we would go and take it in this smaller, more quieter pace. As World War Z comes out on home video, a big question is whether any footage from the original ending will be included as a bonus feature. Unfortunately, Forster confirmed that the Russian battle sequence will not be included in what was at Blu-ray DVD because those scenes were never finished and in some cases never shot. Finally, Forster says, I don't think you will ever see the Russian sequence because we never really finished it. We never spent the money to do the visual effects. Once we shoot it and we did a rough cut, everyone agreed that this is too big and too exhausting. It would be better to go simple route. So to finish the sequence, aside from fine tuning it, we would have to do massive amounts of CG work, which would be in the millions of dollars. So I don't think everyone would want to spend the money on that. It's a fantastic sequence like the Israel one, but it's just too much. It was too big and not the right ending. Meanwhile, Brad Pitt talked about developing what was that sequel, but what was said is based on Max Brock's oral history of the zombie apocalypse. Not much material from the book actually ended up in the final movie. What was said by Brad Pitt ending did the rewriters salvage the movie? Very few big movies get made in Hollywood without multiple screenwriters. Maybe the studio buys an intriguing screenplay written by a newcomer and hand it off to a more established name of a rewrite. Maybe a director signs on to the project brings along a alongside script's calibrator. Maybe the star demands frequent dialogue punch-up on the set. In the end, the Writer Guild attribution process sets through the wreckage of infinite draft to provide the illusion of order in the credit. Who gets a story by? Who gets a screenplay by? Meanwhile, Hollywood's finest script doctor toil in well-paid obscurity. Hollywood will record that John August probably wrote one line of dialogue in every movie made in the 21st century. What White says is only an exception because the rewriter process has been out in the open way back in 2008. Is not it cool? Let us surprise about a draft of the screenplay by Babylon 5 creator J. Mitchell Straczynski. The script was abandoned in favor of a new take by Matthew Mitchell Cornondens, best known for political thriller like The Kingdom and State of Play. Last year, Lost co-creator Damon Liftrand very publicly joined the Trouble production with the status purpose of crafting a new ending. Lindolf brought along Drew Goff, a co-writer of Cabin in the Woods, who also worked on Lost and Buffy the Vampire Slayers. If you are keeping track, that means World War Z shares a DNA with three of the greatest gender shows in modern TV history. The film in theaters credited all of those writers. Straczynski and Carnan share the story by, while Carnan shares the screenplay by with the Godon Lineful Ambassador team. Laura M. Holson, fascinating brandy-fire profile of the production, also claims that Christopher McCary, the usual suspect Jack Reacher, played a role in the salvage effort. The most interesting thing about what was said is that you can apparently identify the specific moment when the rewriters kick in. Brad Pitt characters spends the middle part of the movie in Jerusalem racing away from zombies and hopping on a plane. Originally, that plane was going to him to Russia, where there would be a gigantic zombie action fight featuring Pitt hiking his way through mountains of zombies. This is apparently the part of the film shoot in Budapest, which, as reported by E.W. Geoff Butcher in this World War Z cover story, mostly fell away to cutting room floor. Lindelof himself stands Vanity Fair that when he joined the project, he envisioned two routes to saving the production. One road would have been a soft touch rewrite. Road 2, which I think is the long short road, is that everything changes after Brad leaves Israel. The studio opted for the second option, which is why the final act of what was said feels radically different from the rest of the movie. The film begins with an epic scope with gigantic action sequence that race throughout major cities, but in the finished production, Pitt board a plane to Cardiff, and the final sequence feels more like a classic zombie horror movie. With Pitt and an essentially all-new supporting cast walk away quietly throughout darkened corridor. Usually hundreds of people die in the first 3-4 of the movie after the plane crash. The living undead body count doesn't even come close to an episode of The Walking Dead. To me, the funny thing is that the radical change actually seems to work. This might just be because What Was That is a film constructed out of episodes with roughly the same three set up. Act 1 Brad Pitt goes to a city. Act 2 Zombie attack. Act 3 Brad Pitt runs from attacking zombies. The original Russian set final act sounds like an extension of the Jerusalem scene with hordes of digital zombies who all move like wild beasts, but the whale sequence rises the stakes by luring them. Brad Pitt and his friends need to get somewhere to get something. In order to do that, they need to avoid the zombies. It's the kind of simple plot that would have made for a great episode of Lost, and it brings an element of humanity to a movie that previously traded in gigantic disaster set pieces. However, that is not quite the ending of the film, and this is where What Was That shows its hand a little too much. The filmmakers told EW that they envisioned What Was That as the beginning of the possible trilogy. Originally, the ending would not have reunited Pitt's character with his family. Halson describes it as a cliffhanger that could be played out over future movies. Neither the original ending nor the book of What Was That features any indication of the major medical breakthrough in the fight against zombie. A breakthrough that in the release film provides the whole reason pattern of the final act trips to Wales. It's established that zombies don't attack people suffering from terminal illness. In a nutshell, zombie can smell cancer and don't want to eat it. The vaccine works by apparently infecting carrier with some strain of the terminal illness. And effectively makes people invisible to attacking zombies. The closing montage establishes that the armies of the world are all taking the vaccine. We also see it being airdropped around the world. This would seems to mark the end of zombie-human hostility. Like even if many people or entire countries turn zombie before getting vaccinated, theoretically a teeny squad of zombie-proof soldiers could clear out an entire undead city. But the ending insists that it's not an ending. Literally, Pitt's final voiceover begins with the star insisting, "This is not the end, not even close." Despite the rough post, What Was That seems poisoned for a good run at the box office. Even if the movie doesn't entirely drop its massive budget, it's not outside the realm of possibility. The Paramount would greenlight a slight cheaper sequel. Keep in mind, this is the studio that, thanks to the modern franchise economy, is working on a sequel to Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. The question is, what would a sequel to What Was That look like? Would the zombies somehow mutate or develop a resistance to the vaccine? Or maybe the film would focus more on recreating the art after the apocalypse, with different factions assuming control of the run of the old globalized world. While Mireille, Enos, Ever Smile, and more to the point, would you want to see a sequel? What Was That, a movie of Brad Pitt, and here we go. The most expensive horror movie of all time was not even that scary. Although 2013 Brad Pitt vehicle What Was That was not the most expensive horror movie ever made, the zombie action thriller was not particularly scary. Big budget can be a blessing and a curse for horror movies. On the one hand, bigger budget theoretically means more money for special effects. This means that the monster and the murder can be more intensive and realism, and is generally seen as a good thing. After all, nothing sinks a good horror movie quite like harshly unconvincing, cheap special effects. However, there is another side to this equation that makes high-budget horror high risk. Since even great horror movies can bomb at the box office, it is always risky when an entry into the genre gets very expensive. The bigger a movie budget, the more viewers it must attract. Horror's intensity put many viewers off the genre altogether, while the genre score often lures younger viewers from watching its movies. Thus, big budget horror movies usually need to tone down the scares and the violence to attract big budget office paydays. The result is box office bombs that kill horror franchise since ironically they are too big and expensive to feel like real horror movies. World War Z had a budget of around $190 million. Although 2013 World War Z was not a box office failure, the apocalyptic zombie horror was notably and scary. An adaptation of the 2006 novel of the same name, World War Z, tells the story of Brad Pitt, Gerry Lane, a UN investigator tackling a worldwide zombie apocalypse. With a budget of approximately $190 million, which was rumored to have grown even higher, World War Z earned $540 million upon release. Despite that, the movie never received a sequel or spanned a franchise. This is at least in part because all of its budget, World War Z was not remotely scary. World War Z globe-hopping zombie story had some moments of moderate tension and some minimal gore, but the movie was more concerned with a large-scale action set piece than generating genius scares. Pitt's hero is never his true peril throughout its draggy runtime, while World War Z family-friendly PG-13 rating means that the movie rarely gets gruesome. Compared to the boundary-pushing small-screen series The Walking Dead, World War Z felt like an international thriller than a zombie horror. This was not helped by a surprisingly optimistic ending which, alongside the lack of serious scares, made World War Z feel disappointingly anodyne. World War Z was not even that scary compared to other zombie movies. World War Z had the misfortune to arrive after a string of truly scary zombie movies which makes its shortcoming as a horror zombie more obvious. World War Z might have been a serviceable survivor thriller, but director Dooney Boy's seminal smash hit 28 Days Later had offered viewers an era-defining zombie movie only a decade earlier. Even World War Z better extended cut never came near matching the intensity of 28 Days Later or its sequel 28 Weeks Later, and this issue was compounded by their plot similarities. Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake provided a far scarier, grislier, and bleaker zombie apocalypse in 2004. Both the 28 Days Later movies and World War Z focus on military response to zombie outbreak, but only the former franchise could turn this material into something terrifying. To make matters worse, World War Z Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake provided a far scarier, grislier, and bleaker zombie apocalypse in 2004. Like World War Z, Snyder's Dawn of the Dead gave viewers a look at the fantastic outbreak of a zombie apocalypse. However, this earlier zombie horror was immeasurably more effective, much like 28 Days Later. World War Z is more of an action movie than an horror one. Although David Fincher cancelled World War Z2 might have fixed this issue, the biggest problem with the zombie thriller was primarily one of tone. World War Z was more of an action movie than a horror movie, even though its monsters were zombies, much like Zombieland crafted a sweet rom-com storyline into the shambling corpse of the zombie horror subgenre. World War Z added zombies to a jet-setting British thriller. The problem was that this approach made Pitt's hair too safe. Viewers could not convince themselves that Pitt's well-equipped, highly trained former UN advisor was in any real danger throughout World War Z's story. This would be fine in an ordinary action thriller where the protagonist's quick-thinking heroism is the movie's main appeal. However, World War Z was ostensibly a horror movie. The adaptation fell short since despite its giant body count, there was never a sense of real danger in its action movie plot. As such, World War Z failure to put Brad Pitt's lead character in danger resulted in a horror movie that was very costly but hardly scary. I am still upset that there's no sequel to Brad Pitt's $540 million horror that's now streaming on Netflix also. When World War Z came out in 2013, it was immediately hailed as a promising start to a brand new zombie franchise, but that never materialized. Horror is a genre that often finds itself falling into familiar pattern throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Slasher horrors and horror comedies had a heyday at other points. Some genre like body, psychological, supernatural, and more all had moments where they became the most popular and prominent categories. However, the zombie genre has been largely quiet for decades, with just a handful of decent movies featuring The Walking Dead. Often, a talented director or a popular franchise is enough to kick off a wave of new films in a specific genre. And in 2013, it appears as though zombie movies could finally be brought back into the spotlight. This was all thanks to a promising new zombie movie that put a unique spin on the traditional undead story and appeared to have all the right ingredients to become a large and popular franchise. Despite this, Wildfire said never went beyond the first movie, and I still believe it's a tragedy for zombie horror in general. Wildfire said is now on Netflix and was supposed to have a sequel. Marc Forster, who had already grown to become a fairly successful director with titles like Finding Neverland and Quantum of Solace under his belt, lent his considerable talents to Wildfire said. In addition, the film starred Brad Pitt, one of the top Hollywood A-listers of the last several decades. With this considerable talent and a story that was strong enough to bring zombies to the big screen in a way that had not been done quite as powerfully since George A. Romero popularized the creature featuring in the 1960 and 1970. The movie was a huge hit. While the budget for the film was not cheap, at 190 million, the film came good, earning 540 million at the box office. This made the studios behind the movie were keen to make a sequel, and director Foster already envisioned the project as the first part of an epic trilogy. So, not long after the original came out, the sequel was announced. Unfortunately, this was just the beginning of the long and strenuous journey for the studio and the creators working hard to get the movie made. Why what was said to should have happened and why it's not unlikely. Despite the What Was That sequel being announced almost immediately after the original movie hit theaters, the sequel ran into a whole host of issues. For several years, the project remained in development hell, with new writer and director being announced. However, after years of struggling, the legendary filmmaker David Fincher, who has created several mind-bending projects such as Fight Club 7, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Gone Girl, was announced as the new director, with filming set to begin in 2019. Being a fan of both Fincher and Woodward said this was spectacular news. However, once again, the movie hit several flaws which lead to the project being shelved permanently. In 2019, when the film was eventually set to begin filming, THR reported that one of the biggest reasons the film was never made came down to politics. In China, the world's second biggest movie industry, movies featuring zombies and shorts are banned. This major roadblock was too big for what was said to overcome and was potentially the last nail in the coffin for why the movies was retired permanently. However, what was said was not without its flaws. The movie may have been a big hit financially and a popular new talk on the zombie genre, but there was also some backlash to the movie due to its staying from the original novel upon which it's based. A 2006 novel by Max Brooks, which is similarly named What Was Said, An Oral History of the Zombie War, was the text which was loosely adapted from the 2013 movie. The novel approaches the story in a very different way through a series of fictional interviews which take place 10 years on from the outbreak. While Fincher is no longer set to direct a sequel, the director has teased that there is a possible World War Z remake in the pipeline. While this may be disappointing news as far as Brad Pitt's unfulfilled action hero franchise, it would be a cathartic and positive way to continue the story, and while I may always long for a follow-up to the original movie, it would be great to at least get the same world and story back on the big screen, even if it means remaking what was said from the ground up. What was said, Zombies CGI mistakes broken down by VFX artists. VFX artists are breaking down what was as CGI zombies and discussion on noticeable mistake. Directed by Marc Forster, the film follows Gerry Lane and his family who find themselves caught in the midst of a global pandemic where a virus begins turning humans into the living dead. Brad Pitt stars as Lane and is joined by a cast that includes Mireille, Enos, James Dale, Matthew Fox, and more. Released back in 2013, the movie performed well at the box office and received mostly positive reactions, though some criticism surrounded its visual effects. In Corridor's Crew latest video, VFX artist touched on a couple of the flaws in what was said while looking at the CGI used during one particular scene in which zombies are climbing over a bus. They point out that there are two versions of the same person. Jordan Allen that explained that this can occur when creating simulation of many people. The way that a simulation works at the base level is you have your initial character models and you convert them into what are called agents. And those agents are replicated hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of times to create these armies. And when you have so many thousands of people, you don't have so many thousands of medals, right? You are gonna see replicate. Why CGI was used in World War Z? Some of the action in World War Z is unusual when the zombies climbing and falling onto each other, and as Corridor Crew described, that is where simulation would be used. Along with the bus scene in Jerusalem, another notable instance of CGI takes place when the zombies attack the Retrospective while eventually getting within the city's perimeters. On the outside, World War Z fast-paced zombies swarm the theater and create mounds of bodies. When it comes to the physical appearances of the zombies, they are more practical with dark veins and eyes that look almost glazed over. The CGI is most evident during the scenes that contain large quantities of them. Spreading the infection through bites, they tend to go after just about everyone, meaning action sequences are frequent, but those in Jerusalem seem to feature the most effects. With disappointment over the CGI zombies and some of the movie's mistakes now being pointed out, a sequel could have been given a chance to improve in the area. Unfortunately, any plans for a World War Z to have reportedly been cancelled. It makes sense to utilize motion capture and simulation, especially when duplicating a massive number of zombies, but the final results of World War Z could have been better accomplished. World War Z, a movie by Brad Pitt, and the ending of the movie. Ever since George Romero essentially set the template with his 1968 horror classic The Night of the Living Dead, pop culture has served up so many zombies that it might seem that every angle on reanimated corpse had been explored. With author Max Brooks bought us World War Z in 2006, however, he injected new life into well-trod territory by offering up a global after-the-fact perspective on the kind of apocalyptic outbreak usually related through a ground-level narrative. The book, portrayed as an oral history from survivors of mankind's all-out battle against annihilation by shambling zombies, was a critical and commercial success, which of course made it ripe for filmic adaptation. Enter Brad Pitt and his Plan B entertaining production company. When Paramount purchased the rights to Brock's book for the A-list actor, fans were understandably excited about what was that prospect on the big screen when the film finally arrived in theaters. However, the finished product bore little resemblance to its source material, presenting a pit lead action thriller with ghoulish monsters who attack in sprinting waves. This after-production cycle that saw rewrites, reshoot, and an entirely re-evasion third act. Audience embraced it, but those who were hoping for a faithful adaptation of Brock's work were left wondering how exactly they had gotten here. This then is a look back at the ending of World War Z and how it went from bright source material to hit script to problem This then is a look back at the ending of World War Z and how it went from prize source material to hell script to problem production to box office hit. Dawn of War. After the success of his 2003 How to Mingle the Zombie Survival Guide, Max Brooks decided to take his love of The Walking Dead up a notch, using his own work's vision of the movie. Zombie roles themselves inspired by the Romeric canon with established elements like zombies, slow gait, and vulnerability to headshot, and drawing inspiration from Studio Tokal oral history of World War II, he crafted a horror novel set in the era after the outbreak of a virus that reanimates corpses and nearly wipes out the human race. In it, a member of the UN post-war commission traveled to locations around the world, conducting interviewers that take the reader from the first hotspots to the collapse of society to the darkest moment when humanity finds a way to fight back. Despite its after-reaction report format, the book is full of scenes of zombie terror, gripping political commentary, and creative ideas about the way in which humankind would need to adapt in order to overcome a threat to its very existence. Audience response with great enthusiasm, and World War Z would top the New York Times bestseller list, eventually selling more than 1 million copies. With that amount of success, World War Z was bound to be a hot commodity when it came to film rights, but who would take on the challenge of adapting this conventionally structured effort? Battle plans. After a biting war with Leonard DiCaprio, Adipian Brad Pitt, and Plan B got busy bringing Max Brooks' vision to the screen. They brought on J. Mitchell Stacy, a veteran comics creator and the mind behind cult classic TV shows Babylon 5, to write the script. Straczynski set toward crafting a screenplay that would draw inspiration from thrillers like The Bourne's Identity, retaining much of the book's political emphasis and international scope. Straczynski was a much-loved name in the genre fan circle, and his work on World War Z touched a nerve with exactly that audience. A leaked version of the script made its way into the hands of the film nerds at Is Not It Cool News, where it was called Oscar-worthy by that site's draw, Mireille McVinney, comparing it in scope to the Academy Award-nominated apocalyptic thriller Children of Men. Mivney offered up the description of a script that kept the book's interview-based structure, painting a picture of the post-war world in which people are starting to wonder if survival is a victory of any kind. Straczynski's scripts also ended up on the 2007 Blacklist and annually compiled survey of the film's industry favorite as just unproduced screenplays with that kind of momentum behind the project. And director Marc Forster, a veteran of the James Bond franchise and critically acclaimed dramas like Monsters Ball, on board. The stage seems set of what was said to be a new kind of zombie movie, serious-minded and perhaps even award-worthy. Transformation. The fine sign of trouble appeared in 2009 when Marc Forster revealed that the script would be undergoing a rewrite from Matthew Michael Carnahan, whose previous work include The Kingdom of the State of Play, despite Ross's statement from Max Brooks, who was not given input throughout the screenwriting process. Word around the lot has that the rewrite came as the result of a clash between Forster and J. Michael Straczynski, with the former preferring a more action-oriented focus than what was present in the latter script. Carnahan's script changed things dramatically. Instead of taking place as the book does in the aftermath of the zombie war, this new version put us and Brad Pitt's Gerry Lane sequel is the middle of the zombie apocalypse right from its earliest day. The focus was placed more on action and the Lane family struggle to survive, rather than on the larger political and social implication of an all-out struggle against human extinction. Lane would still visit several locations around the earth, from South Korea to Israel to New York, NJ, but instead of interviewing those who had been through the worst of the situation, he by experienced it firsthand. With this new script in the works, principal photography kicked off in July of 2011, but The change its focus would hardly be the last hurdle the production would face. Reshoot for the head. From the jump, Woodward seems a bit cursed. Several high-profile names including Edie Harris and Brian Cranston were in. Then out, Marc Forster and Brad Pitt's relationship soars over time with the director, new to blockbuster action after a career focused on drama, meddling on decisions such as how the film's zombies would be portrayed on screen, eventually setting on sprinting waves of snarling calls rather than the book's more traditional form. Hungarian counter-terrorism team raised a warehouse in which the production was storing 85 guns meant to use as props during a portion of its shot meant to take place in Budapest because the weapons should not be cleared with the national government. Basically, it was kind of a mess. The biggest issue, however, arose with the film's third act. Shooting began up before the script was completed. As it is progress, studio executive expressed reservation with the ending at which Foster arrived. Heavy on action and dark bordering on bleak, it's definitely showcased the movie's blooming budget but left both studio executive and the creative team thinking something was missing. The problem is, this conclusion was not reached until said ending had already been shot and rough cuts were being reviewed. Patient Zero. So why all this bulb about the story's ending? Well, the book ending is a bit nebulous. In it, humanity, after wanting large portion of several large misses to the Walking Dead and retreating to various safe zones, discovered that it must re-evasion itself. Industry is retooled to facilitate the war efforts, and military weaponry and tactics are completely overhauled to deal specifically with the kind of threat posed by a horde of shuffling cannibalistic cops, goodbye shock, and hellhead shots. The book's climax sees various governments, including that of the United States, making an all-out offenses to retake territory that had previously been overrun, reclaim the world for the living. As is so often true in life, things are a little messier than that. The undead threat never completely goes away. Zombieism is never cured. The geopolitical ramifications of so many millions dying, of governments changing the rushing are still being sorted out. The earth environment has been devastated due to unclear conflict in the early days of societal breakdown and ruptured and unchecked fires. Life of those who have survived humanity near extinction is harder than it used to be, with the only note of hope being that we as a species started down our own annihilation and beat it back. It's not exactly Hollywood blockbuster material. The Russian front. So what was so problematic about Coherent Stake? Well, after a globe-trotting adventure trying to get ahead of the zombie pandemic, Pitt's character ended up on a passenger plane escaping from an overrun Israeli settlement. On head to Moscow, the flight crash landed in Russia, where Pitt and the survivors are rounded up and conscripted into a zombie fighting force, a spec for the elderly and infirm who are summarily executed. The story then takes a leap forward and finds Lane, a hardened member of the battle-tested team, tasked with clearing the tunnel of Moscow, making use of the Lobo, a melee weapon showcases in the book, including in this segment was a massive battle taking place in Moscow's red squares. Over the course of the conflict, Lane, now a hard-nosed zombie-slaying badass, noticed that the zombie appeared susceptible to cold and uses his tactics to gain the upper hand in the battle. He attempts to relay this information to his wife, but she is stuck in the Florida Everglades and is also in a relationship with the soldier played by Matthew Fox, whose part was reduced to more or less a walk-on in the final cut. Lane decides he has to reunite with his family, and the film ends with him leading a massive D-Day-style invasion on the Oregon coast, kicking off a fight to reclaim the United States that would have been featured in a sequel, A New Hope. The ending was massive and set the story up to launch a franchise, but just about everyone who reviewed rough cuts from studio executive on Dawn felt the shift from the everyman Pitt played through the first two-thirds of the movie to what amounted to an 80s style action hero in the last third was abrupt and emotionally unsatisfying. What's more, the fact that his family is frustrated and still separated by the time the credit roll left viewers cooled. Sad reservations were so intense, in fact, that Demon Lindelof of Lost fame was warped into idiot around changes to the third act. Lindelof would later bow out in favor of Draw Goddard. He after Paramount two option, one made up of minor tweaks to up the emotional stakes and one that unchanged just about everything after Lane leaves Israel. Surprisingly, the studio opted for the more drastic and costlier option, the coupled with 7 weeks of reshoot during which Foster and Pitt were no longer on speaking terms, resulted in the budget of the film blooming to a reported minimum of 190 million, harassing Paramount on the movie and resulted in a 7-month delay in its release. Oh, and that trouble broadcast portion of the shoot, the majority of the 12 minutes of footage it yielded was dropped entirely. What Act 3? So, after all this back and forth, where did we end up? Instead of crash landing in Russia, land zombie-infested flight out of Israel head of the World Health Organization facility in Wales. And it's coming in for a landing, however the zombies threaten to overrun everything. Lane is neither a really brilliant or a really dumb move. Detonates a generator that tears a hole in the fuselage and depressurizes the cabin, leading to all the zombie being sucked out in rust and its running man, joke of your Jasper, and the plane coming in for an intense crash landing. After a blackout, Lane, impaled by a rather large piece of shrapnel, wakes up in the wreckage and along with Shagan makes his way to the WHO outpost that was his initial destination. Overcome by his injuries, he loses consciousness and later awakes under the care of the WHO doctor played by Peter Capdelli, a billing that led many to think the filmmaker was tripping off Kertesz's upcoming role as the BBC's best-known time-traveling alien. After regaining his sense, he comes to a shocking conclusion. Having seen the zombie hordes pass by the sick and elderly, he believes that whatever virus causes the transformation drives his host to seek out only health and viable victim to facilitate its spread. Could this be the key to humanity's survival? Pathogenian. Would not you know it, our WHO facility is just the place for Lane to test his theory that by infecting oneself with a deadly but curable pathogen, it's possible to create a sort of camouflage that will cause zombie to ignore a potential victim. The only problem is that the lab contains the types of pathogens he needs is in the zombie-infested part of the building. In order to figure this all out and possibly save humanity, Lane and his companion have to embark on a sort of stealthy mission, sneaking their way to a particular vault without alerting the torment undead wandering the halls. Here we see the results of Lindelof and Coart's effort to scale the action down to a more personal level. Rather than an epic battle, we are treated to a tense game of cat and mouse as Lane and company tiptoe their way toward the irrelevant vault. While they are eventually separated, Lane does get where he needs to go once he is there. However, he is trapped by a zombie blocking the exit, which is the perfect impetus for him to conduct the kind of experiment that only works in the movies. Injecting himself with an unknown pathogen, he then opens the door only to find himself ignored by every zombie he encounters on his walk back to freedom. War begins. That climax having happened, we then move into a dynamite that dovetails somewhat back toward the larger geopolitical scope of the book. With Lane's through prompt correct, we see the distribution of an injectable vaccine brought from a strain of meningitis to people around the world. As humankind begin to fight back, we see scenes of various battles, including some of the footage of the Moscow fight from the original cuts ending. Zombies are burned evacuation are conducted, and a note of hope on a globe soul scale is sounded. True to the rework purpose, however, the main focus remains personal as Lane and his family are happily reunited in a safe haven in Nova Scotia. Pitt's voiceover speak of a war just begin, but for his character, it seems the journey has ended in the best possible place, back together with his wife and daughter and out of harm's way. Aftermath. To phrase the Grateful Dead with a long, strange trip, it was for World War Z, from bleak book to faithful adaptation to all-out war in the streets of Russia to a family brought together and a tide turner. With all that renewable and with so many changes from the source material, would audience respond? Yes, they would. What was that exploded to a box office take of $202 million domestically and $540 million worldwide, which were pretty great number for a film with such a troubled production history. It also clocks Pitt's biggest opening weekend, delivering $66 million in its first 3 days. Unfortunately, this success did not cover the contingent that believed the property, as the sequel was scrapped after several stop-and-go efforts that included the signing of director David Fincher, also apparently factorizing in case China bang on zombie movies, which crippled the potential of international revenue. Still, despite this trouble, World War Z's success showed the audience were hungry for more Walking Dead. Meanwhile, everyone involved emerged unscathed, with Pitts going on to openly speak with 2019 Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Second, the Spanning called his TV series Sense8, Forster directing Christopher Robin for Disney, and Damon Lindelof crafting one of 2019 top TV shows. Watchmen, not bad for the crew behind a movie that at certain point had stronger to its ending, seems like it would be dead on arrival. The World War Z. How would World War Z original ending would have saved the franchise? World War Z original ending, which was drastically different from the film's actual ending, would have saved the franchise future. World War Z is loosely based on World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war by Max Brooks. World War Z, starring Brad Pitt, came out in 2013 and enjoyed a healthy level of success. A sequel was initially planned until Paramount cancelled it in 2019 for several logistical reasons, but Brad Pitt still hopes to make the sequel happen one day. The original World War Z ending was deemed too abrupt and incomplete, so Paramount spent millions of dollars rewriting and shooting the final 40 minutes of the film. World War Z original ending was much more similar to the book's ending, but Paramount felt that it would not be satisfactory to the audience, so it was ripped off and drastically rewritten. While World War Z Ultimate ending was perhaps most satisfying at the time, it backed the franchise into a corner and made a potential sequel challenging to conceive. World War Z original ending featured Brad Pitt, Gerry Lane joining the army fighting against the zombies in Russia. The plan was for Lane to spend years fighting in Russia before finally finding a way to contact his wife and then flying back to America to save his family. This ending would have been darker and less definitive, but it would have left the franchise open for a potential World War Z 2. World War Z ending was far different, with Lane finding his way to a World Health Organization (WHO) building where he realized the zombie will not attack someone already sick. This ending provides a neat way to defeat the zombies, making winning the war reasonably straightforward. This ending was well received, and as a went-off movie, it gives a clean and hopeful end to the film. Unfortunately, its tidy finality also makes a future installment difficult. The changed World War Z ending makes a sequel more difficult. The main problem that World War Z ending poses to potential sequel is that it seemingly solves the zombie problem. With the path to winning the war so clean and not overly difficult, it would be hard to make the sequel feel important. What was that it's still one of the best zombie movies. But if I had used a more open ending that did not solve the zombies problem, a sequel would feel like a necessity instead of a chore. What was that could still get a sequel? It is just going to be difficult to conceive. There's a lot of left to be done in terms of actually ending the war, so it is not as if there would be not story to tell. The issue is that it feels like the problem the franchise was created to solve has already been resolved, making a potential sequel feel hollow. Do you ever wonder how quickly the world you live is could fall apart? In what was that former investigator Gerry Lane is thrown away from the normally a family base into a race against time. Within moments, civilization fall apart, presenting a terrifying invasion of zombies that threatens to eat all of humanity. The film opens on what seems like an ordinary day in Philadelphia. Gerry Lane, his wife Karen, and their two daughters are stuck in normal city traffic. All of a sudden, a strange virus quickly spread through the city, turning normal traffic into a terrifying mess. Infected people turn into zombie variant in a matter of seconds, spreading the disease as a frightening rate. Gerry is used to handling international problems and now he has to use those skills to solve a global challenge. The apocalyptic thrill is an epic journey that will test the strength of a man who is motivated to protect his family and save what's left of the world. When the former GN investigator Gerry Lane and his family are stuck in traffic, fast-moving zombies take over the city and infects others by biting them. People who get bitten turn into zombies in a shockingly short amount of time. During this sudden spread, Gerry makes use of his experience and reflexes to get his family to safety, but barely making it out of the city by car. Following this, Gerry Lane and his family spend the night in a small town with the family who generally take them in. Gerry then calls Thierry, who he used to work with at the UN. Thierry makes plan for the launches to be taken to a group of US Navy ships out at sea, where researchers and military people are fighting out how big the global pandemic is. On the ship, Gerry learns that the virus has spread worldwide and brought down countries and armies. He is forced to return to work and is told that his family can stay safely on the ship if he helps find the source of the zombie outbreak.